Okay, well, hi, I'm Chad Thompson. I'm a linguist at Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne. My work up until now has not been with Myaamia or indeed any other Algonquian language. I work with Athabascan languages mostly, and mostly in Alaska. And Athabascan and Algonquian are two different worlds linguistically, and linguists too. We don't get together as much as we should. I've also done work with the Old Order Amish in Indiana and just beginning to work with the Burmese. So I'm new at this, and I appreciate all that David Costa has done and Daryl Baldwin, and appreciate even more the help that and patience they've shown toward me. Excuse me. So I'm going to be talking about analyzing stories, and specifically how to identify characters in stories. And Myaamia has pretty much free word order. Like you can put the nouns before or after the verb, the subject before the object before the subject, and so on. And it has this cool thing called obviation, which we don't have in exactly the same way in Athabascan. It's an interest to linguists. In the past, when I've tried to look into this, just reading what Algonquians have written, I was always frustrated, wishing they'd be more specific about these terms and about the reasons for the different word order. Now that I've tried to do it myself, I can see why. It's a lot of fun, but difficult. So when I have here, reading stories in Myaamia. Let's say you wanted to, the Winter Stories and Narratives book, you wanted to read just the Myaamia. How would you be able to identify what the subject of a sentence is and what the object is if you don't rely on word order like we do in English? And not only read it, but also say you wanted to tell a story, about a trip to Disneyland or anything in Myaamia. How would you know when to have just a verb in your sentence and when to have a noun and so on? So these are important questions and baffling. I'm not really looking at my PowerPoint, so I think I've talked about it. I talked about, here I have my guides. I relied heavily on David Costa's dictionary, and the Myaamia text, David was kind enough to let me see his interlinear text, and that helped quite a bit. My true guides are the people, though. I'm trying to speak quickly because I know people are getting hungry and so on. And I also want to say, since I'm a linguist, I think what I'm talking about is fairly accessible. Oh, just a word of advice, don't try to figure out that diagram. That's not mine, but I think it's accessible, but if it's not, if I lapse into jargon, please shout out or wave your arms, burst into tears or whatever. But it's two approaches that linguists can take to things like word order and obviation. One is just entirely structural. And there are different ways you can do this, but something popular among a lot of linguists, I'm not one of them, but is to look for some kind of underlying structure based on a concept such as universal grammar. And the thing I have on there is actually I copied from someone's paper. The problem with this is that it may provide something really useful about human knowledge or human language, but it doesn't help, at least as far as I can see, help you understand why you have a particular word order. And the other is functional. I'm pretty much a functionalist. The problem with this approach is it's messy. But it looks for the function of a particular structure, based on such things as cognitive or principles, the way people think, or cultural values and norms, and so on. So you're about to see the functionalist approach, and someone else can do the structural one. So when looking at narratives, three of the main things people look at are reference tracking, grounding, and structuring, or some people call it information structuring. So reference tracking would be like, who are the participants, which ones are important, and so on. And then that's what I'll be talking about. And then background or foreground information, sometimes people have an aside, it's like, oh, by the way, kind of comments. And there's some other things as well, but I'm trying to rush through. I hope I'm not going too fast here. So I looked carefully at 7 stories, and I want eventually to look at all that I possibly can, certainly all the ones that are available. But this provided me with hundreds of clauses, so it's a good start. And I put the information about the reference, Wasagi Chakwa, Fox, whoever the character, or even a pipe, everything that could be a noun. I put it into a database, and I'll show you how I did that. And then I had information about these, is it a noun? Is it only referred to by the verb? Is it proximate or obviative, and so on. And then I counted things. So this is just one page of I use like the numbers database. It's like Excel. It's really basic, but you can see the kind of, so I have clause 1. A clause would be, if you have a verb, you have a clause, and the line would be the line as was presented in the narratives as I saw them. And then I have which story, who did it, and whether the noun was animate or inanimate. This is kind of importance, by the way, can be a particular character can be important in a particular story, generically throughout the whole story, or at a particular part in the story, or it can be culturally important. And as far as I can tell, what's called gender in Myaamia is tied to importance. And so animate things, humans, animals, are animate, as the name would suggest, but there are also some what we would normally think of as inanimate things, which are classified as animate, and these would be culturally important things. So I looked at animacy because I thought it would give me a clue as one way as to looking for importance. And then I have like the word order of the overall sentence, if it was a noun, whether it was before or after the noun. And then some of the measurements I did, referential distance is a way of looking for importance, one way. And you cannot look at, not importance, I mean predictability. Predictability and importance are not things you can directly observe. So you have to, based on assumptions, measure them indirectly. So I mentioned animacy is one way of perhaps looking at importance. Another way, to get back to, let's do this in the order, referential distance measures predictability. So it's assumed that something is predictable if it's been recently mentioned in a story. And so I count back the number of clauses before something, so I say I have Wasagi Chakwa. I'm looking at this particular noun and this particular clause, and then to see how predictable, this particular character is, I count back the number of clauses until that, it is mentioned again. So Wasagi Chakwa would be mentioned in most of the clauses in a story about him, so it would probably be one. And then the topic, things can be predictable for other reasons, like overall cultural predictability. And I'm checking the time. 12:15 is what I go to, right? So beg pardon? Yeah. 12:10. Okay, thanks. We'll try to keep to that. So I won't say what I was going to say. I'm a professor, so I'm scattered. I hope you forgive me that. Just view it as entertaining. Okay, so, by the way, I just go back. So you can see, I don't know if there's a pointer here, but RD would be referential distance. You only go up to 20. So it's never been mentioned by the people who developed this. If it hasn't been mentioned for 20 clauses, you might as well not even mention it. So you go from 1 to 20 in terms of referential distance. So in this particular story, I guess, I can't even read it. What's the, was it old men? Yeah, so old men is, the first time it's mentioned in the first clause has never been mentioned, so it's 20, and then the next clause was just mentioned, so that's 1, and then Wasagi Chakwa is 20 and then 1 and so on. Okay, that's just explaining the measurements. Okay, so an example of what you might do with referential distance, and this is not at all surprising. You see this most languages. If something is really predictable, you can refer to it with a pronoun, or in the case of Myaamia, nothing overt except for what you find in the verb. So that's what I call zero. It's not really actually zero, just a shorthand. Or if it's referred to a noun. And so you can see the average referential distance for a full noun in the clauses I looked at would be close to 10, and then about 1.5 clauses back if it's 0. So it's predictable. You don't need a noun. And that's not the only reason you have nouns. In terms of persistence, yeah, there's actually a difference here. Something that's a full noun persists last. I didn't explain persistence. That's, you count the number of clauses within the next 10 that particular referent appears. And the assumption is that the more important something is, the more you'll mention it. So you can see nouns are a little bit less important than zeros. And I'm not sure why this should be the case entirely, but I know part of it is I noticed that inanimate, unimportant things were referred to with nouns more often than animate, important things. So if you're talking about a rope, you mention the word rope more often than you would the person handling the rope. I mention it as a noun. Okay, so word order. The possible word orders in Myaamia, I'm looking now where you have both the object and the subject as nouns, and then the verb, which actually doesn't happen very much in Myaamia. Either you have no noun or you have just one noun. The last one, but you can see all the possibilities. In the 7 stories I looked at, I did not find an example of object, subject, verb. You just go through, you can see, since I'm worried about time, I won't go through these, but you can have examples of subject, verb, object. This would be like English. Wasagi Chagwa asks the old man. The old man, so one of the old man went to get water. One old man watered, he fetched it. This is verb, subject, object. Tells, old man, Wasagi Chagwa. And then verb, object, subject. These are very rare actually, but you can see grasp, old man, grasp one, this would be one of the ropes, old man, the old man grabbed onto one. Where you have the object before the subject, there's so few of these you can't make any generalizations, but in this example, in the next one, you notice that the object is inanimate, so you wouldn't be having the water fetching the old man. Okay, so in terms of the numbers that I looked at, with all two nouns, a subject and object, you can see the subject verb object is the most common. And a couple of them just have one. The clause types, so 253 of the clauses I looked at had no nouns in them. No subject or object nouns. I'm ignoring, actually I'm not ignoring, but I don't have it up here, other types of nouns. But this would be just no nouns in them. If you have just one noun, subject or object, that would be 238. And then only 35 clauses had both subject and object. So the possible functions of word order, you can have, it could be based on predictability, it could be based on importance, or it could be based on some other idea where the subject comes first, that the things are presented in the order in which they happen. So an action originates with the subject, and whether the verb, you put the verb or the object next, I guess doesn't entirely matter, and then it goes on to the object. So I noticed my abstract, it was longer than anyone else's, so I apologize for that. And also, the thing I said in my abstract, I don't agree with anymore. Because that was before, when I wrote the abstract, I was just looking at the text and figuring things out. And then I went to test my theory by counting things, and whoops, I'm wrong. So, but that's good. But you can't, I don't want to rely on my own judgment. So the temporal order. Subject first principle. I think word order, unfortunately, for if you're trying to tell a story, is kind of based on all three. So, but just in generally speaking, the subject is before the verb. That would be, red would be before the verb, purple after the verb. The subject is before the verb much more often than after, whereas the object is the other way around. In terms of if you just have two nouns, this is kind of the same thing, but the last slide included when you have two nouns. If you just have one noun. So subject verb 67, verb subject 29, object verb 29, and verb object 87. Didn't I just show you that? Now, in terms of predictability, I noticed that totally new information tended to be before the verb or first in the sentence. Like if you're introducing a character for the first time, unless it was inanimate. And if it was inanimate, it would more likely to be introduced or like a place, a locative. Would be after the verb, and something new and important before the verb. But also, if you have two important characters engaging, maybe having a conversation or doing things to each other, the subject would always be first, and then you mess around with obviation, which, oh gosh, I hope I have time to say something about. But anyway, you see in this one, bear and rabbit are going back and forth, and you can see that in each case the subject. I'm missing a noun. This is weird. Oh gosh, how did that happen? Okay. I was pushing buttons, and then the slides were out of order, and then it went off my thing altogether.
I'll put you back on right there.
Okay, thanks. And okay, in terms of gender and word order, animate things are more likely than not to be preverbal. And then the inanimate ones could be preverbal or not, but there's still, animate could be either preverbal or postverbal. They're pretty close, but the inanimate ones, there's quite a difference between them. Inanimate would be in the blue. Okay, obviation, I'll just say a little bit about. Forget about my term topic there. That was like these really general terms. I just wanted a temporary definition. But non-topic animate nouns are marked obviative. There's actually a suffix on the noun that tells you this guy's not the topic. And then the topic one is not marked, but there would be one proximate noun in a sentence, and all the other animate nouns would be, one proximate, and all the other animate nouns would be obviative. And this is marked with a suffix. And also, if the obviative is a subject of the sentence, there's a little special thing on the verb, which would be the second example there. So the question is obviation, importance, or predictability. And what I found is that proximate nouns are more predictable than obviative nouns. They're also more important, but that doesn't appear, and I want to look at more information, but it doesn't appear to be as important actually as predictability, which is opposite of what I said in my abstract. So, what do you know? So this is a referential distance. I have in the corner there, if you're interested in t-test or measures of statistical significance, that's what that is. And so this is statistically significant that the average referential distance for proximates would be 1.7, which is predictable, and then obviative, close to 6, which is unpredictable, relative to the proximate. And then topic persistence measuring importance, that difference is not as great. It's also, according to the t-test, statistically significant. But I want to look at more to be sure. And then also I looked at switching subjects, and you can also shift obviation. So yeah, here this is I had these before, but in the second sentence there, bear is obviative, the subject of the previous sentence, and so rabbit's the subject. And the sentence after that, the clause after that, rabbit now is obviative and bear is proximate. So the obviation can shift from one sentence to another. And I guess I'll just point that out and try to finish on time or ahead of time. Another thing I did is, for subject of a particular clause, I looked at the previous clause to see if that previous clause had the same subject. And for the proximate nouns, most of them, the proximate nouns in a clause, which were the sentence, were also the subject of the previous clause. I hope that makes sense. Okay. And then for the obviatives, on the other hand, most of them, you had a change in the subject. So this, I think, is also tied to predictability, which would support the idea that obviation appears to be more sensitive to predictability than importance, but both play a role, which I don't entirely understand. Oh, and then, okay, any questions? Did I go too fast? It's too late now.
I know a lot of tribal members are completely unaware sometimes of the level of work and research that goes into reconstructing a language before you even begin to speak it. And so I actually like to have presentations every now and then, like the one Chad just gave, where I know a lot of you just probably had a hard time understanding what was being said. But the important message is that it's not as easy as just simply peeling some words off of a page and regurgitating them. There's a lot to these languages, and there's a lot of places where you can mess up if you're trying to communicate something. And we really don't want to lose the real essence of what our grammar represents, that worldview, and how it ultimately gets placed in a future generation and how they use that. And so for at least in our work, we do have to go to those depths and those levels to really try to understand why things are a certain way, so that when we and people like George and others go into a youth program and teach, they have an understanding of why things are the way they are. But we don't oftentimes share that. But it's good for you to get a glimpse into that. Thank you, Chad, for taking that dive and sharing that with us, though.